Between 1963 and 1968, the Navy sent its construction battalions into Vietnam to do two jobs at once: build and fight. The Seabees poured concrete for airstrips, put up fighting bunkers, and manned machine guns on camp perimeters. They built the fortified outposts that the Green Berets operated from and then helped defend them when the Viet Cong came through the wire. 16 naval mobile construction battalions sent 83 Seabee teams into the country, dropping small groups of builders into some of the most remote and dangerous ground in South Vietnam. These men built what the war needed, and they did it in places where the nearest help was a helicopter ride away, if the helicopter could get through. Most Americans who served in Vietnam never knew the Seabees had been there first, but the Seabees had built the ground they were standing on. The Seabees had been in Vietnam long before the big American buildup. In 1954, they helped move hundreds of thousands of refugees south during Operation Passage to Freedom. 2 years later, a survey group from Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 10 spent 2 months on foot and in jeeps, mapping over 100 miles of jungle roads as part of an 1,800-mile look at what South Vietnam had for a road system. The answer was not much. They worked 7 days a week in terrain that would have been rough even without a war on. A decade later, those same surveys helped the Seabees build the roads the whole effort ran on. By the early 1960s, the advisory mission was growing, and somebody had to go build things in places where a regular engineering battalion would not last a week. In February 1962, Admiral George Anderson, the Chief of Naval Operations, stood up a new kind of unit called the Seabee Technical Assistance Team, later just called a Seabee Team. Small mobile groups of construction men pulled from the core trades: builders, steel workers, electricians, utilitiesmen, equipment operators, mechanics, and engineering aides. A junior Civil Engineer Corps officer ran each team. A Navy corpsman kept them patched up. The teams usually ran about 13 men, though some jobs called for more. Before they shipped out, they trained for months at Port Union in California, Davisville in Rhode Island, or starting in 1968, Gulfport in Mississippi. Vietnamese language, weapons qualification on everything from the service pistol to crew-served weapons, and each other's trades, so any man could fill any seat on the crew if somebody went down or got medevaced out. The first two teams, 0501 and 0502, landed in Vietnam on January 25, 1963. Team 0501 went to Dam Pao in the Central Highlands. Team 0502 headed to Triton, right up against the Cambodian border. Both were there to support Army Special Forces running the Civilian Irregular Defense Group program, a CIA-backed operation to turn the Montagnards and other highland tribesmen into local fighters who could hold ground against the Viet Cong. In 1963, there were only about 10,000 Americans in all of South Vietnam. The roads were wrecked by decades of war and sabotage. The bridges were blown. There were almost no usable airstrips outside the cities. The Seabees were some of the first Americans to start building anything, working alongside Green Berets in camps that were still going up when the shooting started. The Green Berets needed the Seabees because Special Forces soldiers, tough as they were, did not know how to build a fortified camp from scratch. Fighting bunkers, mortar pits, command posts, perimeter defenses with proper fields of fire, an airstrip graded flat enough to handle a caribou transport, roads cut through mountain terrain to connect one camp to the next. That took tradesmen. The Seabee teams filled that slot, building camps in the highlands and along the Laotian and Cambodian borders where the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese were thick. By the end of 1964, 14 teams had served or were still serving their 6-month tours, every one of them in contested ground. Each camp they built was a position the Green Berets and their Montagnard fighters could hold and operate from. That meant the Seabees had to think like infantrymen while they built. Every bunker needed interlocking fields of fire. Every mortar pit had to be placed where it could cover the approaches without being spotted from the tree line. Command posts went underground. Ammunition storage went where a direct hit would not cook off the whole position. The airstrip had to be long enough and flat enough for a caribou to get in and out, but close enough to the camp that men and supplies could move without getting picked off crossing open ground. And all of it had to go up fast, because the longer the construction took, the longer the team and the Green Berets were exposed in an unfinished position with half-built walls and gaps in the wire. The living conditions at these sites were about what you would expect for a camp carved out of jungle along a border nobody controlled. The men lived in the camps they were building, sleeping in whatever was up, eating what they had, sharing the same wire and the same risks as the Green Berets and the CIDG fighters around them. There was no rear area, no big base down the road. The team corpsman was often the only medical care for miles in any direction, treating Montagnard fighters and Vietnamese villagers alongside his own guys. At its peak, the medical program was treating 3,000 Vietnamese a month. But the corpsman's first job was keeping his own team on its feet, and out at these border camps, that meant handling everything from construction injuries to shrapnel wounds with whatever he could carry in his kit. When the supply chain came up short, and it came up short often, the Seabees improvised. The American buildup had driven construction prices through the roof, and teams on tight budgets sometimes could not buy the lumber and nails they needed, so they bartered. New American units coming into country wanted war trophies, and the Seabees figured out that Viet Cong flags were as good as cash. One steel worker with a sewing machine could turn out a convincing fake, and the dirtier and more blood-stained it looked, the more plywood and 2x4s it was worth. The Viet Cong who supposedly died carrying these flags was a Seabee who knew how to age fabric. Nobody asked too many questions, and the bunkers went up. You used what you had, and if you did not have it, you figured something out. By mid-1963, some teams got handed off to USAID and shifted to building schools, clinics, and roads for the Vietnamese population. Over 350 miles of roads, 60 schoolhouses, 30 medical buildings, 865 homes, 7 marketplaces. The numbers were real, and the work mattered to the people who used those buildings. But the teams that stayed with special forces or rotated through the border camps had a different war entirely. Their job was military construction in places where the enemy could see the dust from the bulldozer and knew exactly where you were. By mid-1968, 83 teams from 16 parent battalions had done time in Vietnam. The program kept growing. 2 teams became 4, then 8, then 15. Every core area in the country had seen Seabees at work, building what the war needed. Fighting was not new to the Seabees. The construction battalions had gone ashore with Marines at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Their motto, "We build, we fight," was not words on a patch. Men had died for it across the Pacific, and the Seabees who went to Vietnam knew the history. The teams trained hard on weapons before they deployed, everything from individual small arms to crew-served weapons, and they were expected to help defend whatever they were building. At Special Forces camps, that meant fitting into the defensive plan, manning fighting positions, and holding the line when the camp got hit. The Seabees were not infantry, and nobody said they were. But when the rounds came in at midnight, nobody on the other side of the wire was checking your rating. The weapons changed as the war went on. Early teams in 1963 and 1964 carried M14 rifles and .45 caliber pistols, standard Navy issue. Once the M16 came into wider use from 1966 on, the later teams carried that instead, the same rifle the grunts carried. Special Forces camps had machine guns, mortars, and recoilless rifles in the defensive arsenal, and the Seabees were expected to know every one of them. Not just know them, but be able to use them in the dark when everything was going wrong at once. Along the Laotian and Cambodian borders, where the Viet Cong and NVA operated in force, the threat was constant. It did not take days off. Security was half the job every day, and it decided how much building actually got done. The night watch was the part that wore men down. After 10 or 12 hours of physical construction work in heat that could hit 110 degrees, a Seabee would clean up, eat whatever there was, and then take his turn on the perimeter. Some camps took probes 2 or 3 times a week. Others went quiet for weeks and then got hit hard all at once. Either way, you could not sleep through it. Every man on a Seabee team knew what a mortar sounded like when the tube popped, and how many seconds you had to get flat before the round landed. That kind of knowledge came fast at a border camp. The men who did not learn it did not last long. A job that would have taken weeks somewhere safe could drag on for months when the crew had to split time between building and standing watch, between pouring concrete in the morning and sitting behind a gun all night in the dark. At Lang Vai, near the Laotian border, a reinforced detachment of 36 Seabees from Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 11 got helicoptered in from Da Nang in mid-1967 to build fighting bunkers, gun positions, mortar pits, and command posts for the Special Forces camp. Having to protect the builders while still running patrols and securing the perimeter stretched the Green Berets thin. That happened everywhere. Construction crews and combat troops shared the same wire. The Seabees built all day and sat on the perimeter all night. Nobody got enough sleep, and the work never stopped. The worst night came on June 9, 1965, at a CIDG camp next to the village of Dong Xoai, about 55 miles north-northeast of Saigon in Phuoc Long Province. 9 Seabees from Team 1104 out of Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 11 were there with 11 Army Special Forces soldiers from Detachment A342 of the 5th Special Forces Group and roughly 400 Vietnamese defenders. Team 1104 had only been in country 4 months. They had finished building a camp at Ben Soi and moved to Dong Xoai on June 4th to start work on a runway. The camp's defenses were not finished when the attack came. What happened next would produce the only Medal of Honor ever awarded to a Navy Seabee. Just before midnight, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 Viet Cong from the 9th Division hit the camp with everything they had. Mortars and recoilless rifles dropped more than 400 rounds on the compound in the first 3 hours alone, a round every 30 seconds for 3 straight hours. The barrage tore apart the fighting positions and wrecked what the Seabees had spent the past 5 days building. 2 Green Berets died in the initial shelling and several more went down wounded. Construction Mechanic 3rd Class Marvin Shields, 25, from Port Townsend, Washington, took shrapnel but stayed in the fight. Steelworker 2nd Class William Hoover was hit during the battle and did not make it. What followed was 14 hours of close combat. A small garrison outnumbered 10 to 1, with no place to go. Shields kept going through all of it. He carried ammo to the line, helped drag a badly wounded soldier to cover under direct fire, and took another round, his 3rd wound of the night. When an enemy machine gun had the whole camp pinned flat and nobody could move without getting hit, Shields volunteered to go after it with 2nd Lieutenant Charles Williams from Special Forces. They knocked it out. Shields was hit one last time going in and died shortly after. Williams, wounded multiple times himself, survived. Both men received the Medal of Honor, Shields posthumously. He is still the only Navy Seabee to ever receive it. A construction mechanic who spent his last 14 hours fighting as an infantryman because that was what the moment asked for, and he was not the kind of man who quit. His widow, Joan Shields, and his father, William Shields, took the medal from President Lyndon Johnson at the White House on September 13, 1966. Shields earned 3 Purple Hearts that night, 1 for each time he was hit and refused to stop. William Hoover got a posthumous Bronze Star with a Valor device and is recognized as the first Seabee killed in the Vietnam War. Frank Peterlin and Johnny McCulley both received the Silver Star. Out of 9 Seabees at Dong Xoai, 2 were killed and 6 were wounded. 1 man walked away clean. 1 out of 9, after 14 hours against a force that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Every one of those 9 men had come to Dong Xoai to pour concrete for a runway, not to fight for their lives. Peterlin and McCulley spent another full day on the ground dodging the enemy before a helicopter finally got them out on the morning of June 11th. 3 unarmed birds flew through heavy fire to pull out the surviving Green Berets and Seabees, but 2 more helicopters got shot down trying to help, and 14 of the rescuers were killed or went missing. Peterlin remembered afterward that Shields used to carry his guitar everywhere and loved singing and dancing in the evenings, especially with the Cambodian troops at their first camp. His widow put it the only way it needed to be put. He died as he lived, for his friends. A man who was not trained for what he did that night, who had never been trained for it, but did it anyway, because the guys next to him needed him too, and he could not walk away from that. Dong Xoai was the worst single fight the Seabees saw in Vietnam, but it was not the only one. Ambushes on roads, mortars on the perimeter, sniper fire while you were trying to work, probes coming in after dark. That was the routine across all 4 corps areas for the entire time the teams were in country. Building in a war zone was not something that got interrupted once in a while. It was the condition, every day, at every site. When the Tet Offensive hit on January 31st, 1968, the Seabees out in the provinces were right in the middle of it, same as everyone else. The program had just expanded to 15 teams, which meant more Seabees were scattered across more ground right when the whole war blew apart. Building and fighting were supposed to be 2 halves of one job. In practice, they were 2 full-time jobs crammed into the same 24 hours, done by the same men. A team told to finish a bunker complex at a camp that was taking probes every other night had to make a call nobody back in Hawaii could help with. Keep building and hope the perimeter holds? Or stop the construction and put every man on the wire until things quiet down, knowing the camp needs those bunkers finished before the next real attack comes? The teams figured it out on the ground. There was no playbook, nobody above them had a better answer. The men who served on these teams learned to live with that kind of math every single day they were in country, and it never got easier. The numbers tell part of it. 350 miles of roads, 16 special forces camps built from raw ground, 8 miles of airfield, more than 4,000 feet of bridges. The decorations tell the rest. Purple Hearts, Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and 1 Medal of Honor. Every one of them earned by men whose primary job was building things, not fighting. Between those numbers and those medals is what it actually felt like to serve on one of these teams, building camps and bunkers and airstrips in places nobody back home had heard of, while the big operations up north got the press and the history books. 83 teams served. The men who were on them knew what they did. Most of the rest of the war never noticed. The Seabees in Vietnam did something no other American unit matched. They built the camps that Special Forces operated from, and then held the perimeter alongside them when those camps got hit. They put up bunkers and gun positions by day and sat behind the guns in those positions at night. They earned combat decorations fighting next to some of the best soldiers in the American military, and they built things that the war could not have been fought without. Their war was not about large operations and body counts. It was fought with concrete and sandbags, 1 camp and 1 airstrip at a time. The line between building and fighting, so clean on paper, meant nothing when the mortars started dropping in. The men who served on these teams knew that, and that is the part of their story that has never been properly told.